Kojeve writes that authority is the possibility of an agent acting upon others without those others reacting against him, despite being capable of doing so. What is authority? What makes someone an authority? What are the kinds of authority? What are we talking about when we talk about authority? And so for Kojeve, it's the possibility of an agent acting upon others without those others reacting against him despite being capable of doing so. So you could say that they're willingly going along. They're willingly going along with you. And there are 4 irreducible types: the father or the master or the leader or the judge. These are 4 irreducible types. Each type answers a different question. Why do people obey voluntarily without coercion? So, I think that it's not inappropriate for you to ask yourselves, when do you follow somebody's directives willingly? When do you just do what they say and you could oppose, but you don't? And you have to ask yourselves, maybe it's a religious figure, maybe it's somebody else, maybe it's your spouse, where and why are you obeying voluntarily without coercion? You have the father. Let's look at these types. The father. Okay, the authority of the one who was there first. The father does not need to justify himself. His priority in time is itself the justification. We obey tradition, precedent, and age because the past has already proven itself by producing the present. To reject the father is to deny one's own origin. So when we're dealing with the father, we have this authority of the one who was there first. So again, the priority in time is the justification. We're in the realm here of origin, tradition, and cause. That's authority of God the Father or the creator of all things, the rootless root, and so on, right? The Ancient of Days, all these names, some traditional, some mystical, that bestow upon the divinity the authority of the Father. And then in a more prosaic way, why do you obey your parents? If you obey your parents, what authority do they have? The authority here of the past over the present. But that's not all, right? So what's next? Let's move to the present. And this other form of authority is the master, the willingness to risk one's life. The master proved in the struggle for recognition that he values something more than mere survival. The slave who preferred life to glory recognizes the master's superiority, not of strength, but of existential seriousness. He demonstrates his superiority by being the one who acted, the one who dared. So he doesn't have the authority of the past. In fact, maybe you have somebody in that group who does have the authority of the past, but then you have this new authority, the darer, who risked his life and who proved in the present to be superior. Okay, so we have the father, the master. Now we move to the leader. The leader is future-oriented, right? Looking to the future. And we're in the realm here of project, foresight, and vision. This is the authority of the one who sees further ahead. This is not the authority of cause, origin, and tradition. It's not primarily the authority of risk, struggle, and superiority. The authority of the one who sees further ahead. The leader possesses a project that encompasses and surpasses the projects of those led. We follow because the leader's vision of the future is more comprehensive than our own. The future through the leader authorizes the present. His future vision, which lives in his present speech and action, is there for him as a project, here and now, but future-oriented, has this capacity, this capaciousness, this comprehensiveness. And finally, so father, master, leader, and judge. And the judge, you see, has the temporality of the eternal. We're dealing with justice, equity, and impartiality. This is the authority of the disinterested third party. The judge has no stake in the outcome, and it is precisely the absence of personal interest that generates authority. The judge embodies justice itself, something eternal that transcends the temporal interests of the parties before him. So, for example, the traditional king is more of a father and a master than a leader and a judge. Napoleon, more of a leader okay, than a father or a judge, more of a master and a leader. Roman Senate, more of a father and a judge than a master and a leader. The papacy, also more of a father and a judge than a master and a leader. U.S. Supreme Court, obviously quite heavy on the judge authority, the authority of the judge. Alexander the Great, Gandhi, a Silicon Valley founder, right? Very little father authority in the Silicon Valley founder, but a lot of visionary authority. Okay, and Confucius, sage teacher Confucius. Look, we have his master authority quite low, down at 0 in this particular representation. But on the other hand, his other characteristics are quite high. Spartan general, more of a master than anything. Okay, the prophet, more of a leader, but you see a nice mix because the prophet clearly has to have some traditional authority. Why do people obey? What existential mechanism produces voluntary submission for each type? Okay, what existential mechanism produces voluntary submission for each type? So let's just click into that. In the case of the father, you have the debt of origin. The child did not choose to be born. The father as cause precedes the child absolutely. This temporal priority generates an asymmetry that can never be overcome. So you may have thought, what do you owe your parents? Well, you owe them everything, right? Because you wouldn't be but for them. We obey the father because we owe our very existence to what came before us. Sometimes I ask my kids to do the dishes or to take out the garbage or something like that. I say, we gave you life. The least thing you could do is bring me a cup of coffee, right? We gave you life. It's like a debt that you can never repay. Now, of course, I comically exploit it here, but nonetheless. There's a traditionalist legitimacy, hereditary monarchy, aristocratic privilege, customary law, constitutional originalism. They all draw on paternal authority, right? Seniority, the founding fathers, ancestral right, and so on. And here's the danger, though. Remember we said there could be a corrupt father and so on. That pure paternal authority tends toward conservatism that cannot adapt. If the only ground of authority is what was, then every change appears as a revolt against the source. This is why real authority always compounds the father with other types. The leader's foresight, for instance, corrects the father's backward gaze. So, you could walk through this and you see that in the case of the master, you have the risk of death as well as heroic and military authority. See, Kojeve, following Hegel, knows that the master's authority is inherently unstable. The slave, through labor and fear, develops capacities the idle master lacks. And over time, the slave's concrete achievements erode the master's existential claim. That is why purely martial authority based solely on having fought, decays when peacetime demands other competencies. So one of the things that happens in the case of the heroic and military authority, what happens in a time of peace? There's a dialectical reversal. What do you do in a riskless, bourgeois, liberal democratic, capitalist situation? What happens to the authority of the master when there's no struggle present? Okay. All right. The leader has the project that encompasses charismatic and visionary authority, but a risk is the tyranny of the future. Let's look at this. So pure leadership authority sacrifices everything present for the sake of what is to come. Now you can think about the often discussed split or division or fight, if you like, between the tech right and the trad right. Well, that's what we're talking about. Two sources of authority, right? If we talk in terms of the tech right and the trad right, when we're talking about the tech right, we're talking about the authority of the leader, project, foresight, vision. When we talk about the trad right, we're talking about the authority of the father, cause, origin, tradition. In some sense, there's also the right that valorizes war, struggle, pain, violence, conquest. There is such a right. Yeah, so they read their war memorials and Junger and all of that, right? That's not the authority of the leader primarily, or the father primarily. That's the authority of the master. And then the judge. Maybe that's our, common good constitutionalism there, or something like that. So it's a mix, but still. The tech right, trad right helps us to see, I think, that the authority of the leader can degrade into a tyranny of the future, where it sacrifices everything present for the sake of what is to come, right? Where even humanity itself is just to be replaced by our glorious robot overlords, because after all, that's what the march of intelligence through time demands of us, and it's going to be good for business too. at least until the robots replace the business people also, the VCs and all the rest of it. And then we have the judge. You have the disinterested third party position. You've got the authority of juridical and institutional instances. You've got the blindfold on Lady Justice as the iconography of this type. Scientific peer review, academic tenure, right? This neutrality, the authority of neutrality. But the risk is that pure judicial authority cannot initiate. It can only respond to what's brought before it. Now, this is hugely important in political theory, where we talk about the rule of law, or you talk about liberal neutrality, or, you say we're not going to take sides. Well, that neutrality has a place. There's somewhere where you want justice to be blind. There's somewhere where it's good to be Switzerland, or however you think about these things. But neutrality can become so paralyzing. It can fail to act. It can fail to decide. So think about Schmidt here. Schmidt, who talked about the age of neutralization and depoliticization, and who put decision back on the table. So there's a problem here. And when courts try to lead social change, they often face a legitimacy crisis because they are exceeding their type. You see this, I think, with an activist judiciary in the United States. Who's going to be the source of the authority to decide? Is it going to be, as it were, activist judges, where it seems like you're going to put sovereignty into the Supreme Court? Or is it going to be the Knesset or the parliament, right? What's the source of authority? So Carl Schmitt spent a lot of time thinking through this question of sovereignty in relationship to the legal and the political. So these types are, I think, interesting sociologically, psychologically, philosophically, politically, juridically, and so on. You have an irreducibility that the four types cannot be derived from one another. Each rests on a fundamentally distinct ground. And you can see that this ground is temporality. The father has the priority of origin and is related to the past. The master has the superiority of risk and is related to the present. The leader has the superiority of project and is related to the future. And the judge has reference to the eternal, disinterested equity. You can also see here that the father is not the master, the father is not the judge, the father is not the leader, the master is not the leader, and so on, right? These are inequalities. So let's take a case here. The master is not the judge, victory is not justice. The leader is not the judge, project is not equity. The judge is not the father, origin is not impartiality. The father is not the leader, precedent is not foresight. And to wrap up this overview, Kojeve's central claim is that these four types exhaust the possible grounds of authority. Any apparent fifth type can be shown to be a compound of these four. The proof is phenomenological. Each type corresponds to a distinct reason why a person would voluntarily renounce their capacity to react against someone, a distinct answer to the question of what makes obedience something other than mere submission to force. Okay, so you see that we have the four temporal dimensions, and these four temporal orientations cover the complete horizon of human experience. Okay, so 1942 it was published, and the purpose of this was to give you a high-level overview of Kojeve's notion of authority, to hopefully encourage you to read that book and to study Kojeve.